The soil was warm between my fingers that morning, soft, alive, promising. I could almost feel next month's tomatoes and thyme taking root beneath my hands. After 40 years of teaching, I had finally retired. Finally bought this little farm, tucked between the hills of Vermont. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Every creak of the porch and every goat bleat reminded me I'd made it here on my own. That morning I was halfway through the herb bed when my phone buzzed. I wiped my hands on my jeans and saw the name flash across the screen. Harper, my daughter-in-law. She never called to chat, only to announce. I picked up anyway. No hello, no pause, just her voice brisk and sharp. "We're coming next week with a few friends. You can stay in the shed, or maybe go back to the city for a while." I stood there silent, the breeze cooling the sweat on my neck. I could hear Daniel, my son, somewhere behind her voice. He didn't say a word, didn't tell her to stop, didn't even greet me. That silence cut deeper than anything Harper said. I looked around me. The porch swing I'd yet to hang the yellow kitchen tiles I'd chosen myself. The fence line I'd painted one long, quiet afternoon. This place was supposed to be my peace, my reward after a lifetime of showing up for everyone else. And now suddenly, it was too much space for one person. I wanted to argue. I wanted to remind her that I'd bought every inch of this land with my pension and my patience. But I didn't. I just said, "All right," and hung up. Because sometimes you learn that the most powerful answer isn't anger, it's planning. The goats were still chewing lazily in the yard, unaware of what was coming. I stood for a while, palms resting on the porch rail, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. They were coming. And this time I wouldn't just sit back and take it. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Peace isn't something people give you. It's something you learn to protect, even from your own family. After hanging up, I didn't cry or call anyone. I just stood there for a long time, listening to the wind move through the pasture. The goats were chewing lazily near the fence, unaware of the storm that was about to arrive, not the kind that brings rain, but the kind that tests what a person will do when their peace is threatened. I've learned something about anger over the years. It burns fast and leaves a mess. But quiet planning. That's where strength lives. So instead of shouting, I started preparing. If they wanted to come, fine. I'd welcome them in my own way. First, I pulled the guest bedding from the closet, my soft Egyptian cotton sheets. The ones I'd saved for rare visitors went back into storage. In their place, I laid out the scratchy old wool blankets from my emergency kit. Still clean, just not cozy. Next came the Wi-Fi router. I unplugged it, wound the cord neatly and tucked it into a file cabinet drawer. I left a label on the outlet that said, "Don't touch unless you pay the bill." Little details, but they matter. I'd learned long ago that entitlement thrives on comfort. Remove the comfort, and people start showing who they really are. The fancy espresso machine I'd splurged on last Christmas was boxed up and replaced with a dusty $20 drip pot from a yard sale. I set it beside a tin of half-stale store-brand coffee grounds. A small downgrade, but an effective one. Then I adjusted the thermostat 60 degrees at night, 84 during the day. Not enough to cause suspicion, just enough to irritate. The kind of discomfort, that builds slowly like a pebble in a shoe. Finally, I called Nolan, my neighbor down the road. He's been raising goats and chickens longer than I've been retired. I might need to borrow a few friends, I told him. He laughed. "Brown ones or loud ones?" "Both," I said. He understood immediately. By the time we hung up, we'd made a plan. He'd bring them over the night before my guests arrived. That evening, I sat on the porch swing I'd finally hung up, letting it sway gently as the sun sank behind the ridge. The air smelled of earth and lavender. It was peaceful, the kind of peace you hold close because you know it won't last. They thought they were coming to claim space that didn't belong to them, but I was already making room, just not the kind they expected. I sipped my coffee, feeling the swing creak beneath me, and whispered to myself, they wanted space. Let's give them some. The morning they arrived, the gravel on my driveway gave them away before I even saw the cars. Two glossy black SUVs rolled in first, followed by an oversized rental van that looked like it belonged to a reality TV crew. I watched it all from my motel window a few miles down the road, coffee in hand, feet tucked under a wool blanket. Harper stepped out first, wearing silk trousers and heels that had never touched dirt. Her sunglasses were so large they could have reflected her own ego back at her. Behind her came the entourage. 3 cousins, a boyfriend, someone with a ring light, and a cousin named Devon, already recording the barn like it was an exotic safari. Then came Daniel, my son, slower shoulders tight. He looked out of place, like even his body wasn't sure it wanted to be there. He walked up to the porch, bent down, and lifted the ceramic frog near the step. The key was still underneath. I'd left it there on purpose. I wanted to see if he'd take it, if he'd walk in without permission. He did. From my laptop screen, I saw the front door creak open. Within seconds, chaos erupted. A goat blinked calmly from the hallway, perfectly still but blocking their way. One of the hens flapped across the living room rug, scattering feathers. And by the kitchen, 2 lambs were chewing on Harper's fake plant arrangement, completely unbothered. The first scream came fast, then another. Someone dropped a designer bag. A cousin shouted about allergies. Harper's voice cut through the noise, sharp and furious. She kept saying my name like it was a curse, demanding Daniel fix it. But he just stood there, suitcase dangling, expression unreadable. Maybe he was counting the animals. Maybe he was counting his regrets. I muted the sound on my laptop and took another sip of coffee. Watching the scene unfold was strangely satisfying, not cruel, but fair. They wanted to invade my peace. I just made sure peace wasn't easy to take. From the outside, it looked like a mess. Inside, it was a lesson. Comfort doesn't belong to those who demand it. It belongs to those who respect it. I sat back in my chair, the motel heater humming softly beside me, and smiled at the quiet balance returning to the world. They thought they'd come to take over a farm. Instead, they walked straight into a reminder. This land has an owner, and she's not someone you push aside. Sometimes justice doesn't need shouting or confrontation. Sometimes it looks like a goat in your hallway, a hen on your couch, and a woman miles away finally breathing easy. By evening, the chaos in my living room had quieted. From my motel screen, I watched Harper standing in the kitchen like a director calling shots on a film set. One hand on her hip, the other waving as she spoke to the small crowd sprawled on my furniture. Her voice came through the speakers, clear and confident. She wasn't visiting. She was planning. She pointed toward the window, explaining how the old fire pit could be replaced with a patio, how the barn could be renovated for events. Then I heard it. Once she gives up, we'll flip it. It'll be ready in 2 months. Flip it. The words hit harder than I expected. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a takeover. Daniel stood in the corner, head down, scrolling through his phone like he wasn't part of it. Not even a token protest. I had always imagined betrayal sounded loud, yelling doors slamming, but sometimes it's silent. It hides in the quiet when someone you love refuses to speak up. I opened my laptop and hit record. The small red light blinked in the corner of the screen. Evidence file. 8:37 p.m. Then I sat back, letting her voice fill the room, each word sealing its own fate. That night I didn't sleep. I thought about every dollar I'd saved, every classroom floor I'd scrubbed after hours to afford this land. It wasn't just property. It was proof that I had built something for myself when the world said women my age should fade quietly. At sunrise, I called Grace Miller, my attorney, the woman who helped me set up the trust for the farm. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told her what I'd seen, that I had footage, that I needed to make sure they couldn't touch a single inch of it. Grace was calm, steady. She reminded me that the deed was in my name alone, that the trust we built gave me full authority to remove any beneficiary who acted with misuse or disrespect. Her words landed like an anchor in a storm. By noon, my email chimed. 2 formal notices were ready to sign, each one thick with the kind of language that protects peace from greed. One envelope was labeled Harper Moore, the other Daniel Moore. Inside the documents revoked every claim they might have had to my property. Another clause barred any attempt to repurpose or rent the land. If they tried again, it would count as trespassing, subject to legal action. I signed both and set them aside. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I felt something like relief, the kind that comes when you finally take back what's been slipping through your fingers. That afternoon, I drove home. The air smelled like hay and dust, the same way it did the day I first bought the place. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, waiting for the courier to arrive. When he handed me the envelopes, I placed them right on the hall table, next to the little ceramic frog that once hid the key Daniel used to open my door. It felt symbolic. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just sat there, letting the quiet fill the house again. For the first time in days, it felt like the land was breathing with me, like it had chosen a side. When I returned home, the house felt heavier than before, like it had soaked up all the noise and left only the mess behind. The once neat living room looked like a storm had passed through it. A designer handbag sat torn on the couch. A bottle of expensive toner had spilled across the fireplace bricks, and glitter clung stubbornly to the rug. One of the goats had left its own little message by the guest room door, right next to a half-zipped duffel bag someone must have forgotten in their rush to leave. I didn't clean it right away. I wanted the silence to settle first. For 2 nights I slept with the windows open, letting the cold air sweep through the rooms, letting it wash away their perfume, their noise, their arrogance. On the 3rd afternoon, a dusty sedan turned slowly into the drive. No shiny SUVs. This time, no laughter, no cameras, just Daniel. He stepped out, shoulders slumped, eyes red from something that wasn't just lack of sleep. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, the look of a man who had finally run out of excuses. I didn't say a word. I stayed on the porch with my coffee, watching him like I was trying to read the years between us. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and said quietly, "She's gone. Took the train to LA. Said she wasn't born to live in a barn." I nodded once. There was no triumph in it, no satisfaction, just a fact, falling where it belonged. He stood there waiting for something. Maybe sympathy, maybe an opening. But I didn't offer either. Instead, I reached behind me, picked up the old broom leaning against the wall, and held it out to him. "You want to stay here?" I asked. "Start there." He hesitated only for a second before taking it, and then he started to sweep. The bristles rasped against the wood floor, steady, rhythmic, almost like breathing. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. He didn't ask for coffee or food. He didn't defend her or himself. He just worked one quiet stroke at a time, clearing the wreckage they'd left behind. As I watched him move through the house, I realized something simple yet hard to accept. Forgiveness doesn't always come wrapped in words or hugs. Sometimes it comes in the sound of a broom on a dirty floor, in the willingness to face what you've broken and the choice to fix it with your own hands. I didn't tell him he was forgiven. I didn't have to. Some things are better understood through doing than saying. And as the dust began to lift, so did something else, maybe not trust, not yet, but the faintest sense of possibility. The days that followed were quiet, almost unnaturally so. The house, once filled with tension and noise, settled into a kind of rhythm. Again. A rhythm built on work, not words. Daniel started rising before dawn, long before the sun brushed the fields. I'd hear the screen door creak, the crunch of boots on gravel, and then the soft thud of hay being moved in the barn. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for help. He just worked. He learned how to fix the fencing without wasting nails, how to carry feed the right way, how to move among the goats without startling them. His hands, once smooth from office life, began to blister and harden. He started keeping a small journal on the tack shelf, scribbling between chores. I never asked what he wrote, and he never offered to tell. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was something else. I watched from a distance, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of cautious hope. There's a strange comfort in silence when it isn't cold. Some mornings I'd find 2 mugs sitting on the porch rail, one black one with cream and sugar, just the way I like it. He never said anything, but I knew what it meant. One morning we sat side by side on the porch. The sky was still pale, and the air smelled of wet soil and hay. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. There's a language in silence that only people who've lived through regret can understand. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone out there. Then the storm came. It rolled in just past midnight, howling winds, thunder that rattled the windows, the kind of storm that makes you remember how small you really are. I was halfway out of bed when I heard the crash, metal against dirt, and then the bleating sharp panicked. I grabbed my coat and flashlight, but by the time I reached the door, Daniel was already there, pulling on his boots. His voice was calm but urgent. "It's the east fence." Something snapped. We ran through the rain mud, splashing up our legs. One of the younger goats, Nana, was caught near the broken fence, trembling and bleeding from her hind leg. I started toward the truck, but Daniel stopped me. "You stay," he said. "I'll go." His tone wasn't commanding, it was steady, certain. He disappeared into the storm for over 2 hours. I stayed with Nana, wrapping her in dry blankets, whispering to keep her calm while the wind screamed through the trees. Every crack of thunder made me wonder if I'd misjudged him again. Then headlights cut through the rain. Daniel stumbled into the barn, drenched, carrying supplies. His knuckles were raw, his face streaked with mud, but he didn't stop moving. Together we worked, splinting, wrapping, cleaning, until the goat finally settled, breathing slow and even. When it was done, Daniel didn't collapse or complain. He just sat down in the hay beside her mud, up to his knees, chest rising and falling steady. I stood in the shadows watching him. In that moment, I saw not the boy who had disappointed me, but the man trying to make things right. There's something cleansing about storms. They tear through what's weak, but they leave behind what can endure. That night, as the wind howled outside, I realized the storm wasn't just in the sky. It had been between us all along, and finally it had started to pass. The morning after the storm, the world felt freshly scrubbed. The air was crisp, the sky a clean kind of blue that only comes after chaos. The goats were calm again, and the fields shimmered with dew. I was sipping coffee on the porch when Daniel walked up, a few folded papers in his hands. His clothes were still damp from the night before, but his expression was steady, different, and like the storm had rinsed something out of him. He didn't wait for me to ask. He placed the papers on the table and said quietly but clearly, "I need you to read this." The top page bore a title I didn't expect: Conservation Easement Agreement. For a second I just stared at it, unsure what it meant. Then I started reading. It outlined every acre of the farm, every field, every fence line, all tied to a legal promise that this land could never be sold, flipped, or developed. No resorts, no parking lots, no investment opportunities. It would stay exactly as it was protected forever. I kept reading my hands, trembling a little. He'd already filed the soil surveys, gathered the historic maps, even spoken to the local land trust. He had done all of this on his own. When I finally looked up, he was standing still waiting. His voice was low. I didn't build this place. I didn't earn it. But I see it now. What it means, what it costs to keep it alive. It's not about money anymore. Something in his tone told me this wasn't guilt. It was understanding. Real, grounded, unforced. I studied the last page where his signature sat neatly above mine. His handwriting had changed. Firmer, no longer hesitant or decorative. I asked softly, "Are you sure about this?" He nodded. "I am. It's about what matters. It's about you." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I looked out over the field, the garden rose bending gently in the morning light. The fence we'd fixed together after the storm, the barn still smelling faintly of hay and rain. Every corner of that land carried years of labor, sacrifice, and memory. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Then I picked up the pen and signed. Daniel let out a slow breath, like someone who'd been holding it for years. He didn't smile, not in any performative way, but there was peace in his face, a kind of quiet resolution I hadn't seen in him since he was a boy. He didn't reach out to hug me, and I didn't move toward him. We didn't need to. Instead, he stepped off the porch and went back toward the barn, the morning sun cutting through the mist around him. The papers were still in my hand, the ink drying under the light. I sat there for a while, tracing his signature with my thumb, realizing that sometimes redemption doesn't come with apologies or grand gestures. Sometimes it's a simple act, a man choosing to protect the very thing he once tried to take. That was the day I stopped wondering if he could change. He already had. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that maybe it really isn't too late forever. The weeks that followed felt different, not in any dramatic way, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of something real beginning to take shape again. The chaos was gone. The shouting, the tension, the sense of waiting for something to explode, all of it had faded like a bad storm, leaving behind clear skies. What remained was work purpose and a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. Daniel now spent more time in the barn than anywhere else. I'd see him through the window in the early morning, sleeves rolled up dust, catching in his hair as he hammered a new gate or shoveled hay. Sometimes Nolan, my old neighbor, stopped by to lend a hand. The two of them would argue about fence alignment, then laugh like old friends 5 minutes later. The sound of their voices carried across the field, low, easy, familiar. It was the sound of life settling back into place. Inside the house, I found comfort in small things again. My mornings began with a fresh pot of coffee and my worn leather notebook, the one I used to keep lesson plans in. Now it held different notes, reminders to oil the hinges on the back door, to trim the hedges before winter, to buy more nails. Nothing profound. Just the kind of tasks that keep a life moving forward. Sometimes Daniel would leave a mug of coffee on the porch rail before heading out. He never said much, but his gestures spoke louder than words ever could. I learned that silence, once heavy between us, could now mean presence, a quiet acknowledgement that forgiveness had already taken root. One afternoon, I sat outside while the sun stretched across the pasture. The goats were napping near the steps, one of Nolan's older ones, sprawled like she owned the place. From the barn came the rhythmic clang of Daniel's hammer, fixing the same gate that never seemed to stay straight. I smiled at the thought. Not everything in life needs to be perfect. Some things just need to keep being tended to. I opened my notebook again. This time I didn't write tasks. I wrote reflection how much the land had given back, how much peace had cost, how much it had taught me about letting go without losing myself. Peace, I realized, isn't a gift someone hands you. It's something you fight for quietly over and over until it becomes part of who you are. As the evening light softened, Daniel passed by on his way to the barn, nodding once, like always. I nodded back. No grand speeches, no tearful moments, just two people who had finally learned to exist in the same peace they both helped rebuild. The breeze picked up, lifting the edge of my notebook. I let it. The smell of hay and coffee filled the air, and for a brief moment, everything felt exactly right. Some things in life aren't inherited, they're earned. And that morning, with the sun spilling over the fields and the quiet hum of work in the distance, I finally understood happiness doesn't happen by accident. It's something you build one small patient act at a time.